Well, hello everyone and welcome. Tonight we have, or it might even be today, I'm not sure when I'm going to upload this, but we have an interview with D. Frank Robinson that I did last week, but I just now got to edit it because the only way we were able to record was over Zoom. Unfortunately, the recording quality is not great. I need to get D. Frank better headphones or a microphone or something, because we do want to do another show together talking about his JC opinion. But I really want to avoid the audio issues we had this time. So I do hope you can tolerate whatever audio issues there are, because the information and the history behind this man, he's one of the party co-founders, is so amazing. So without further ado, we're going to move on to a discussion of D. Frank Robinson's early involvement with the Oklahoma Libertarian Party and his lifelong involvement fighting ballot censorship. Okay, D. Frank, and I think you know what prompted the initial interest in discussing, well, all of the ballot access issues you have been dealing with over the years, but particularly how you got involved with this. It seems to me from the very beginning. I want to put something on my screen here in 1 second, as long as I can figure out where I downloaded it, because your name came up, as it often does, in an LP News discussion. And I'm just trying to find where Oklahoma was mentioned. And here it is. So let me put this on my screen if I can. Basically, this was in the LP News. I had sent you a copy of it because there was a brochure we were looking for that you sent me for, but I'm going to read again what it said. It said, Oklahoma LP has published a very professional newsletter brochure entitled Declare Your Independence, which sets forth the Oklahoma Party stands on the major issues of the day and includes the history of the LP. Past Oklahoma chairman D. Frank Robinson is working on an election financing reform plan that would decrease rather than increase government control of candidates while still assuring protection against political bribes. He has gotten considerable news coverage for his proposal, which he calls the secret voucher plan. So what are your recollections of any of that, D. Frank? I am just fascinated.
Okay. Well, that takes me back a long way. Back when I was working at Private Practice Magazine with Mickey Edwards, who later became congressman from Oklahoma. And this was just as they were Congress was passing the 1974 Campaign Finance Reform Act. And he assigned me to take a look at that and possibly write an article. Well, in the course of doing research, I came up with the idea that why shouldn't all campaign contributions be anonymous, like the ballot? And then I went from there. It turns out that the method that I was innovating really was a little bit too complicated, because remember, back in 1973, 74, we didn't even have ATM machines. So I put that on hold and put it to the side, and I've worked on it and revised it since. But the main thing that got me in working on ballot access per se was I was trying to gather signatures. This was in 1976, I believe. Oklahoma had just raised their ballot access requirement from 5,000 signatures for a new party to like 40,000 signatures to get on the ballot. And so I had a petition, and I was working at the state fairgrounds collecting signatures with a couple of other libertarians. And the state fair board decided that they were going to run us off the fairgrounds. The upshot of that was we filed suit against the state of Oklahoma, the Oklahoma State Fair Board, and the city of Oklahoma City. And they all settled out of court and decided, well, yeah, when the fair is not on, the state fairgrounds are public property like a sidewalk. And so after that, they didn't harass us anymore as long as we stayed on public property. Okay. And that was really the beginning impetus of me wanting to investigate ballot access laws even more. And of course, later on, Richard Weir came on the scene and started doing his comprehensive nationwide research. Well, that was a bonanza for me and led me to developing the ideas that I'm promoting now.
And we're getting a little bit of garbling, but I think everyone's going to be able to understand it. I don't know if maybe your cord might be a little bad. I'm just saying, it seemed like when you moved around more, and because you're a mover like I am, like you don't sit still. I'm very animated. You're very animated. And it seemed like you might be jogging there might be like a little short in the cord, but you know, we'll deal with it. I'm taking a look at this brochure that I will put up on the screen. It is very nice looking brochure, particularly when you consider the time. You know, people are so used to desktop publishing, they don't realize that these things were not produced as easily as they are today. And it says, we think freedom is okay. Declare your independence. Libertarian Party of Oklahoma, the party of principle. So this is a great, I'm so glad you sent this to me. This will be a great addition to LPedia. We did not have this in the party record. So this is something that Frank searched out on his own and sent over to me. But I noticed also that LP News said you got a lot of news coverage. Now I'm going to do a newspapers.com search to see if I could find any articles about you from that time period. But do you remember any of the news coverage that you got?
I did collect some clippings and information, but Karen Ann, as you may have heard before, I had 2 house fires in 1975, and that destroyed most of my Libertarian Party records that I had in my own personal possession, along with a lot of personal stuff. And I lost about 1/5 of my personal library and so forth. And as a result of the house being burned down by arson, they caught the guy that did it. But I left Oklahoma City and went to Eastern Oklahoma to live and work on the family farm for a few years, and didn't have much involvement in the mid 80s at all, and didn't come back to Oklahoma City and get active again until about 1992, I think it was. But I pulled up my folder with the Declare Your Independence on it. Is there any particular part that you wanted to discuss?
Well, no, I actually wanted to leave it up to you. If there was anything you wanted to discuss on the issues of it, on a future broadcast, I'm just going to read it in full to the audience. But for this one, I wanted you to highlight what you thought was important, what you thought was interesting, because your personal recollections are something that's just not on paper, you know, and it's precious to capture. I think those recollections, and as I said, I'm going to do an archive search to see what articles I could find on the news coverage that may have happened from this, because of newspapers.com has proven to be another valuable resource for LP history. But yeah, maybe just the background of it, what you guys used this pamphlet for, like who wrote it, you know, the parts of it that, you know, you would like to highlight.
Well, I put it together basically as the editor, and we had a local printer printed up for us. What it's used for was primarily that year was we had a booth at the state fair in Oklahoma City. And we had, I don't know, 2,500 or so of these that we distributed at the Oklahoma State Fair out of our booth. Now, we didn't get a whole lot of feedback from that distribution, but we did get, the media took note that we were there and we did exist and we were doing outreach to the public. Now, this is an article I've got here that I wrote, said, "We've got a secret, the way to end dirty money in politics." Boy, that's been a long, long time since I read that. Let's see, there's the, I guess that was our party mailbox down at the bottom. But that was my particular pitch in the newsletter brochure. We intended to be like each of these, like at least quarterly, and things didn't work out. And then we had the article on the history of the Libertarian Party. I believe I got some assistance on that. They provided me with some information to put that article together. I didn't put a byline on it. And then we put some excerpts in. Well, we published our statement of principles. At the time, you'll notice, turn in, that the statement of principles we published was the original 1972 statement of principles before it was amended in Dallas in 74. So it uses the terminology at the end there, laissez-faire capitalism. But we had excerpts from the national platform and the old statement of principles and the Oklahoma platform, and we finished out an article written by Dean, a professor on price controls don't work. And when we were at the fair, I worked as a state fair booth quite a bit, and people, would kind of like they didn't want to argue with us about anything. They said they were kind of like puzzled a little bit. And they, no, okay, I'll look this over, and then they'd move on, And but we didn't get any kind of really trolls or hostile reaction from anybody in distributing this, because I thought at the time we did, well, somebody's going to take this off and read it for a few minutes, and they're going to come back and argue Marxism with us or something. But that didn't happen. So it was pretty successful, I think, in distribution.
Yeah, please do send me the whole thing. And I noticed also on this cover says volume 2, number 1, was Declare Your Independence the name just of this particular issue, or was that the name of your newsletter?
That was going to be the new name for the following newsletter. Previously, it had just been OKLP newsletter before. And we decided, well, we're going to do this real fancy newsletter. And so in the future, we'll go ahead and continue with Declare Your Independence until we get ballot access. And then we'll do something else then. But at the time, since we didn't have ballot access, we were just promoting the idea that, hey, you're a voter. You don't have to just vote for Democrats and Republicans. And like I say, they had just changed the law in 1973, which is another digression if you want to get into.
Oh, yes. This is all about history, hon. I want to hear all about it.
Okay. In 1972, a young man got elected to the Oklahoma House of Representatives. His name is David Lyle Boren. Mr. Boren became a representative in the Oklahoma House of Representatives. And apparently one of his first assignments was to revise the Oklahoma election laws. And in the course of doing that, they wanted to basically take as a template the laws of the state of Georgia and translate them over to Oklahoma. Well, at the time, Oklahoma had a new party could get on the ballot for 5,000 signatures. But in Georgia, you had to have 5% of the registered voters to sign your petition to get on the ballot. Well, they decided, well, we'll just make it 5% of the biggest vote. And while the bill was being written up, I went out and lobbied Representative Boren to not raise the limit because they had never had a crowded ballot in Oklahoma since statehood in 1907. I mean, I think the most parties that ever been on the ballot in Oklahoma was maybe 4: Prohibition Party and Socialist Party, Democrats and Republicans. And anyway, maybe the Progressive Party snuck in there in the teens. But at any rate, they never had a crowded ballot. Well, his eyes just glazed over as I talked to him about all this, and he wasn't paying any attention whatsoever. Well, naturally, the bill got passed by the then predominantly Democratic state legislature. The Democrats raised the ballot access quota first. Then when the Republicans came to power later on, about a decade later, well, they were all for it. They kept it. So, but Mr. Boren went on to become governor of Oklahoma and then went on to become a senator, a U.S. senator from Oklahoma. And the last job I believe he had was as president of the University of Oklahoma, who has since retired. I haven't checked to see if he's even still alive, but the last time he was in the public eye, he was the president of the University of Oklahoma. So Mr. Boren and I had a long period of acrimony, at least on my part. I believe he knew who I was and what I was in the years that followed, but we didn't get into any correspondence or anything back and forth. That's just the history of that sidebar.
I have a question for you. Do you have any of those early, because I went and looked on Lpedia and we have no record of any newsletters of the LPOK, by the way, but we never knew of your early newsletter. Anything you got newsletter wise, I'll take it. I would love to put it up on Lpedia. And when I get this entire file, I went and looked also at the records we had for the platform, and we have a very scant platform history as well. So getting that early platform up will be really nice as well.
Okay.
And I'll do that. I'll do that.
My cousin Sam Hayes III, who helped me found the Oklahoma Party, probably had a lot of those early papers.
Mm-hmm.
Sam, however, was killed up in Colorado going on a ski trip in 1977. And his widow gave me a plaque that Sam had made that I still have hanging on my wall of our statement of principles. He decoupaged it and put it on wood and made a nice thing. And she gave that to me because she thought that Sam would want me to have it. But as far as the papers that he had, I regretfully never asked her to provide those if there were any. So,
well, you never know. They could be in an archive somewhere. We may find them one day. I'll at least note down the names that you had said so we at least are aware that they existed, because you never know where we end up finding things. But you just filled in quite a bit.
Yeah, there are still a few of the founding libertarians around. I believe that Porter Davis, who helped us get the party started, and then he had to defect back to the Republicans and became a state representative for a term or two. But I don't know if Porter's really all this libertarian stuff or not, when he had to, slide back into the Republican Party.
Well, and you're mentioning names that aren't anywhere mentioned in the article on the LPOK. So when I go back through listening to this, I will update that article with some of these names that I had never been aware of before. So that's fantastic as well. Well, what I wanted you to talk about, if you could, is I haven't heard very much other people who advocate for an all write-in ballot the way you do. And I was wondering if you could expound upon that a bit and why you think that is so valuable.
Okay. Before we started the interview, on my Facebook page, I posted a little mini essay for people who are watching who might want to read it and call in. They might comment whenever you post this on YouTube. But basically, the title is "Who Owns the Ballot Owns the Country and the People." This is 3.5 pages. I don't know if you want me to take the time to read the whole thing, but or I could just hit the highlights.
Hit the highlights, and what I will do is provide a link to your post in the show notes if anyone wants to read the whole thing.
Okay. Well, basically, the electoral process cannot be fair and democratic unless all parties and candidates were allowed to compete on a free and equal basis. Now, to accomplish this, the public must make the U.S. Supreme Court feel the heat and see the light. Presently, the court upholds laws that discriminate against third parties by keeping the candidates off the ballot, out of debates, off the public's media screen. The court has even authorized states to ban write-in ballots, thus emphatically defining the ballot as the government's property, not the voter's property. The court cannot seem to find democratic principles in the Constitution, protecting the right of the people to freely form our political will and make unmanipulated ballot choices in elections. The right not to be forced by a censored ballot into the state's approved political orthodoxies is complemented by the affirmative right to launch a political party of your own and be treated equally by the government in the balloting process. The bedrock principle underlying the First Amendment is that the government may not prohibit the expression of an idea simply because government officials find the idea itself offensive or disagreeable. To respect the political sovereignty of the individual voter, the government must never endorse a political party, or even two of them, against any competitors. Moving on quickly. So who has the right to compete for the assent of the voter in elections? Interestingly enough, the Supreme Court has rightly defended this principle of government neutrality, but only in the context of state efforts to drive some people off the ballot. In 1995, the case U.S. Term Limits versus Thornton, the court of Arkansas violated the qualifications clause of Article 1 of the Constitution when it tried to deny incumbents seeking re-election a printed line on the ballot if they had already served 3 terms in the House or 2 in the Senate. Moving on. But the court is inconsistent. If one is not previously elected as an incumbent who is affiliated with either of the 2 dominant parties, then the state and the Congress may pile on additional qualifications to prevent voters from deciding among competitors. Challengers must be handicapped, while the 2-party incumbents can run free. Moving down further, the court said it would not allow Arkansas to evade the qualifications clauses by addressing eligibility to stand for Congress in ballot access clothing, unquote, as this quote trivializes the basic principles of our democracy, unquote. but ballot access restrictions were not deemed added qualifications, but indispensable to an orderly election without frivolous voters voting for frivolous candidates. Now, subsequently, in Cook versus Graylick, the court rejected an effort to manipulate public consensus by placing slanted information on the ballot next to candidates' names, characterizing their voters' records and positions on a term limits constitutional amendment. At the moment when voters cast their ballot, the moment of public choice, the state must be completely neutral, as it must also be along the way in composing and designing the ballot. It seems well accepted in state courts, for example, that public officials may not have a policy of automatically placing incumbents, which are always Democrats and Republicans, first on the ballot. However, printing the party affiliation or lack thereof is not deemed manipulative use of the ballot to engineer a tilting of voter opinion in favor of the dominant parties. Getting close to the conclusion now. It is a commonplace assumption in both public rhetoric and the law of American elections that we have a quote-unquote two-party system. This is a kind of religion that is intended to instill piety and mystical reverence. Yet the priests of this civil religion are corrupt and incompetent, but are confused what they can do about it. Either way they vote, it always gets worse. The voters will grow more frustrated until perhaps they snap and embrace total fascism, unless a political party shows a non-violent way out. The way out is the abolition of all ballot access censorship of voter choice by using a content-neutral all write-in ballot, similar in format to the federal write-in absentee ballot, legal in all states. And so far, no party has challenged the cult of the omnipotent censored ballot in a government court or in the court of public opinion. The solution, in conclusion, to partisan censorship of the ballot is an all write-in voter verifiable ballot. And then I give a link to an article by Professor David Chong on how to correct ballots so that only the voter can verify that their ballot was cast correctly or was counted correctly. And that's the highlights of my 3.5-page screed on Facebook.
Well, you're the one who changed my terminology so that I use the term ballot censorship now. I got that from you.
Okay.
And it opens a lot of conversations, though, because people ears perk up. They have no idea. And then when you explain it, I do think people are getting educated on the topic.
Well, progress is progress.
And I don't think that many people realize what a champion you have been on this issue for decades.
Well, at least since 2016, Karen, because in 2016, I went out and filed for Congress here in Oklahoma. I had my paperwork, declaration of candidacy, and I went out and I offered it to the Secretary of the State Election Board. And he said, well, what's your filing fee for a petition? And I said, I'm not going to give you a filing fee and I'm not going to give you a petition. And he said, well, then we can't accept your declaration of candidacy. And I said, I would like a letter confirming that. And he gave me one. And he gave me another letter in 2018 and another one in 2020, confirming that they're not going to accept my refusal to pay them a fee or to circulate a petition with forced labor in order to get on the ballot. Also, be aware that Oklahoma is one of 9 states that will not permit any write-in voting. I cannot run as a write-in candidate even in the state of Oklahoma. I tried to explain this to the National Committee in 2016, and it pretty much fell on deaf ears. And since then, I have not been approached by anybody on the National Committee to be a co-plaintiff in a lawsuit against the state of Oklahoma to overturn their entire ballot law, which would form a precedent for overturning ballot laws in probably every state. Because if you can't make quotas and you can't charge fees to candidates to get on the ballot, and all they have to do is use the same ballot format that voters who reside outside the United States. The federal write-in absentee ballot can be used by any U.S. citizen voting from outside the United States and send it to their state election officials. But people who live inside the United States, they can't use that ballot. That seems like unequal treatment of voters to me. So what I'm proposing is to make the neutral format of the federal write-in absentee ballot the universal ballot for all elections across the country. And that way, that destroys all premises that like, oh, well, we got to have fees to keep too many candidates from getting on the ballot because they might have to print ballots with that are a mile long. Mr. Binger has already blown that BS out the window by proving that most states have never had more than 8 candidates on the ballot. The California ones had 9 candidates on the ballot, except for that recall election where they had 100 and some odd candidates. But hey, 100 and some odd candidates did not crash the election system in California, and they managed to elect a new governor, by golly. Well, anyway, so all this stuff that's been circulated around, as dogma, that we can't have frivolous voters voting for frivolous candidates, and too many candidates on the ballot are going to just confuse the voter. Well, if the voter goes in and you hand them a blank sheet of paper with lines on it listing the offices to be filled, they can write in whoever they want. They can bring a cheat sheet. At some point in the future, we may want to discuss another idea that I have. But basically, the voter can go ahead and just put in the name of the person they want. Hey, if 40% of the people vote Democrat and 40% of the people vote Republican and 90% of the people vote Libertarian and the other 1% vote for themselves, what difference does that make? The plurality is going to win. And it would be possible with an open write-in ballot that the Libertarians might elect a person or 2 or 3 or 4 to the U.S. Congress. And that would give them leverage to make further changes in election laws. Because ultimately, unlike the propaganda that's being tossed around by the Republicans, the states are not the absolute last word on elections. The Constitution plainly says the Congress may at any time revise any election laws passed by the states. And that includes the format of the ballot. Because after all, as I've mentioned before, before the 1890s, there were no government ballots. All the ballots were privately printed and distributed, and the voter could always cross out any names that was given to them on a Republican, a Democrat, or Progressive, or Prohibition Party ballot and write in whoever they wanted. So effectively, all ballots were write-in ballots until the 1890s, when the states monopolized the ballot and confiscated everybody's right to write in. Because just like the Supreme Court has already said, if the state wants to, it can absolutely ban write-in voting totally. All they have to do is provide some other token alternative means, like they did in Hawaii, to get on the ballot through a primary election. And that's led to this whole business promoting the idea of, oh, let's have a top 2 and a top 4 and so forth in that primary election, and that knocks everybody else off the ballot. And basically the oligarchs still get to pick the candidates. Okay, that's a long speech.
Well, and I mean, you are speaking my language there, because I'm very involved with trying to get RCV implemented in Colorado. And what's happening now is a lot of money is getting poured in now to try to tie RCV to top 4. And I lost my ever-loving mind. I'm like, no way, no, never, forget it, shove it up your ass. So right now, I'm one of the primary voices, I think, keeping RCV on track here in Colorado, because the big money is coming in trying to tie it to top 4 or top 5.
Right. Well, that guarantees that those top 4 or 5 candidates are going to be the traditional candidates, because how you tabulate the vote has nothing whatever to do with who the people get to choose. It's after the elite has chosen the candidates for you and put their names on the ballot, then you can go eeny, meeny, mighty, mo, and you're going to get the same crap no matter which mo or mini you choose.
Well, what they're trying to say is people won't know how to. In Colorado, we have had quite a few candidates, because we actually have excellent ballot access laws, thanks to David Aiken of the Libertarian Party. So we have had on our presidential ballot like 18 people or something. I mean, so the argument of this big money is people won't know how to rank so many people. So you have to narrow it down.
Well, you managed to get through those elections, and the people who voted their actual preferences, presumably. So what's the problem? I mean, okay, in Colorado here recently, you may have had like 18 presidential candidates on the ballot. Some of them got like a fraction of 1% of the vote.
Some of them got like 30 votes. I mean, like 30. We have really easy ballot access laws here. I mean, we had the nutrition party.
Well, when your ballot access requirements get really, really low, there's no point in having them anymore. Except to hassle candidates. What are your ballot access fees?
There's no filing fees for most races. There are local races that have some, but the big races that everyone thinks about are state house, our state senate. There's no filing fees.
Terrific. Well, you're almost there to having excellent ballot system. If you could just get the federal write-in ballot adopted in Colorado, then you could still have any method of counting the ballots and tabulating the candidates, whether it's RCV or whatever. I mean, I don't have my proposal is to not tie in to the method used to tabulate the candidates and select the winner. We're all used over the years of thinking of, well, whoever gets the most votes wins, unless it's been engineered to push you to make it a majority, which is what happens most of the time. You get a fake majority because more than enough people, because so many people just don't bother to vote. It's because they don't want to vote Democrat or Republican, and they don't have an independent candidate, so they don't vote. And some just say, well, eeny, meeny, miny, mo.
Yeah, I thought you would find that funny though. They aren't related and they shouldn't be tied together. But the big brain, big money people think that us poor, stupid voters just can't understand how to rank things. I don't know how we don't walk into Wall's face first. They think we're so stupid.
Well, it's just like you go to the drugstore to buy aspirin and you walk out with the dish soap. Oh, golly, you were just too stupid to remember you wanted to buy aspirin. Really? Yeah, sure. Okay. And perhaps down the road, as soon as I get it a little better organized, I'm going to publicize an idea I have to give each voter the power to program the voting machines when they go to vote. Let's say that the open source software for voting is on a thumb drive, which is biometrically tied to the voter. The voter goes into the poll and they stick the thumb drive into the machine because it won't work until it's programmed, and they stick it into the machine and then they can vote it. And then their vote is encrypted and put into their thumb drive, and they take it, and it's in there for a few seconds, and they pull it out and walk out the door. Now, the state can open source all the software that's needed to operate a Dominion type voting machine, except that now it's not proprietary. The voting machine manufacturer does not control how the machine processes the ballot. That is controlled by each voter's open source programming, already approved by the state and loaded onto their thumb drive along with their biometrics, so that only that voter can use that drive to vote with. That's my most recent idea. That's for the 22nd century, I suppose.
Thank you. You know, I love you so much.
Well, thank you, and I respect you too. Bye-bye.
You have an awesome night. Bye-bye.
You gotta take what you're given, that's how we live it. Don't be mad at the system, it's simply how we've existed. I hear a lot of people talking like they politicians and choose to be an accountant because it's safe in the business, not because they